The college football playoff is remaining at 12 teams this coming season. You would think that would actually be decent news for BYU's chances with the roster intact, but the changes that are coming with that new 12-team format, or the same 12-team format, actually are an impediment to BYU's dreams. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, 14-year credentialed media member at BYU, your resident expert and insiders, your host here on this show. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And thank you to all of you who make us over at Locked On America's #1 sports podcast network. Coming up on today's show, the college football playoff format may not be changing in terms of the number of teams in it, but some of the changes that are coming with it staying static actually hurt BYU's chances of playing in it this fall. We'll get into that. Then we'll get into your guys' questions. Some of you have asked about impact freshmen. There's a BYU basketball game tomorrow. I also need to talk a little bit about another basketball program at BYU, the women's team that's killing it. We'll talk about that. And we'll also address questions about the future for BYU football in terms of the overarching scheme of the Big 12 and college football in general. It's all brought to you today by friends over at TurboTax. We'll talk about them a little bit later on. All right, so if you did not see it, the College Football Playoff Committee formally announced earlier today that the 12-team format, which has been implemented over the last 2 years, is staying intact for the 2026 season. Today was the deadline for the CFP committee and its voting members, so the commissioners of each of the 10 FBS conferences and Notre Dame AD Pete Bevacqua, to inform ESPN, who holds the rights to broadcast these games, if they were going to expand the playoff field or change it. Now, they ultimately decided to stick with the 12-team format, which was a mere formality. If you've been paying attention to the reports out there, that the Big Ten wants a 24-team format, the SEC wants 16 teams, and neither side, because they're essentially the two big dogs who ultimately control the sport, sadly, could not agree on this. The Big Ten would have agreed to a 16-team format if the SEC would have agreed that in due time it would have expanded to 24 teams, but neither side could prevail, and thus we're stuck with a 12-team format. Now, you'll be thinking, okay, Jake, well, the Big 12 was actually speaking of the Big 12 and BYU were in pretty good position last year, had some things swung differently for BYU where the Cougars could have made that field. Yes, they were in position. They've actually been in position the last 2 years, really. And if they hadn't lost to the likes of a Kansas in 2024, if they would have gotten a win maybe over Texas Tech among the two games they played last year, yeah, they probably would have been in the playoff field. But this year, it got a whole lot harder because the new parameters with the college football playoff now dictate that all four P4 champions are going to be guaranteed a spot in the college football playoff field. So if you go by these rules, this past playoff, you would have seen Duke at 8-5, having won the ACC, they would have been guaranteed a spot in the playoff field. Now, the old format was the top 5 ranked conference champions, so therefore we saw James Madison get in favor, or sorry, not in favor, over Duke. But this year, it'd be James Madison getting kicked out in favor of Duke. Now, the other rule is that there's a memorandum of understanding that the College Football Playoff Committee and Notre Dame signed years ago, or at least acknowledged years ago, that if Notre Dame, who BYU does play in October, if Notre Dame is inside the top 12 come the final week of the rankings this fall, so we're talking late November, early December, that final ranking from the College Football Playoff Committee, if they're inside the top 12, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish are also guaranteed a spot in the playoff field. So also extending those rules out to this past year, that would have knocked our national runner-up in Miami out of the field in favor of Notre Dame, because remember, Notre Dame pitched a fit and ultimately opted out of a bowl season altogether where they would have played BYU because they were so unhappy with being left out of this field. So long story short, the 12-team format, yes, BYU's been right there on the cusp of it, but the way things are now written, BYU would have been even further out of this year's field had these rules that are going into this year's season been implemented. So it makes the bar for BYU to clear to go into the playoff, to clinch a spot in the playoff, a little more difficult, if not way more difficult because you now have more teams guaranteed more spots. And it just looks like the likes of the SEC, the Big Ten, they're going to gobble up as many of those at-large bursts as they possibly can. So I don't really like the way that this has been kind of laid out because it just hurts BYU's chances. Now, many of you, and I'm sure we'll see it in our comments section, both live as we go through today's show and also after the fact, are going to say, well, focus on the here and now, Jake. Focus on the fact that BYU has to win games. Yes, BYU has to win games, but if you didn't see the show, the crossover edition I did with JT Wissersill from Locked On Utes, he and I both acknowledged, and I think it's absolutely legitimate, that BYU, the way this roster stacks up right now on paper, this, in theory, is supposed to be the payoff year for the BYU football program. Yes, they've gone 23-4 over the past 2 years. They've absolutely killed it and been right there on the precipice of playing in the college football playoff. But the way that this roster has been constructed, it kind of looks at this year maybe as the year where it ultimately is supposed to all come together. And that is awesome to consider that this could be a run at 11-1, 12-0. But that feels like you have to go 11-1 at very worst. And maybe that one loss you can absorb is to a team like Notre Dame, who, if you look at their schedule, Notre Dame has got a schedule that their toughest games are BYU, Miami, and most likely SMU. Like, they don't have a very stout schedule. So it feels like Notre Dame's going to be ranked inside the top 10 all year long. And it might be BYU can afford that loss in Provo, maybe, and get away into the playoff field, but essentially have to run the table outside of that. It's an extremely, extremely high bar, extremely difficult bar for BYU to clear, but that's how it kind of lays out here. And whether you love it, you hate it, I was fully expecting at some point, I still expect it, that we will see the college football playoff expand. I don't necessarily think that going to 24 teams right away is the right play. In my opinion, I think 16 teams is the right amount because it truly kind of creates a true bracket. You're not having first round buys. You're able to play best on best in theory. It's kind of like the NCAA men's basketball tournament bracket. I know it's 16 versus 64, but we're hearing about the NCAA men's basketball bracket wanting to expand to 72 or 76 teams. And I think that's completely ludicrous. So yeah, I do think expansion is coming, but the way this is going to stack up this year, BYU might have its best team to date since joining the Big 12 Conference, but the bar to clear to really live the dream and play for a national championship, that bar might be higher than ever. So it's kind of crazy to look at it, but that's the way it's stacking up for BYU football, which is, it's an opportunity, but it also is an impediment to living their dreams as well. But I can assure you that Kalani Sitake and everybody inside that football program, they will be focusing on the fact, okay, we have to win to at least put ourselves in the conversation. And I know that we're 9-ish months away from this, but crazy, crazy news coming out of this because the parameters around the playoff committee continue to the sands continue to change and favor the blue bloods versus some of that new blood that the Big 12 and BYU boast. All right, coming up next, talk a little bit about what's going on in Cougar Nation that you guys wanted to talk about. I threw it out on our social media channels to respond with questions, and you guys did so. We'll get to those. Some questions about impact freshmen for BYU football, thoughts on both BYU basketball programs, both men and women. So there's a lot to get to. We'll continue to get to that coming up. Live edition of Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at TurboTax. Tax season not to take over your life. I think all of us understand this time of year. It can feel like that. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever just to hand things off and move on with your day, which sounds absolutely fantastic. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out what forms you need to file, meet with that local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and everything else, and they work to get you every deduction. And obviously you upload your documents, go about your day and get your updates right inside the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver, gives real peace of mind knowing that an expert is on top of it all and handling it for you. So for a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in if a TurboTax expert did not file for you last year. All you got to do is file by February 28th. So you got a little bit of time to get this in, but don't wait too long. Take the taxes off of your plate and get your life back. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you being with us. And thank you once again for making Locked On America's #1 sports podcast network. All right. So I threw it out on social media earlier this week about questions you guys wanted answered. And I intended originally to do this podcast earlier in the week, but as they say, real life got in the way. So we're going to get to those now. And I had a great question submitted by Taylor Dallin. He said this: who are the top 5 freshmen/underclassmen you expect to have a role this year? And I think he's asking, I'm assuming this, Taylor, you want to talk about football. So without further ado, the top 5, in my opinion, I think we'll go from 1 to 5. I think number 1, in terms of underclassmen, keep an eye on Nusi Tamuapea. I think Nusi has got a ton of potential within him. And with Jack Kelly exiting the program, I know that BYU brought in Jake Clifton and more particularly Cade Uluwave at the linebacker spot. But the way that Nusi Tamuapea played in that bowl game, the Pop-Tarts Bowl, he is really looking like he's going to be a big-time player for the BYU football program. So I expect him to have a big role. There's also been questions about why BYU hasn't brought in a wide receiver at the wide receiver spot as well. The next guy I want to talk about, well, actually, it's kind of 2 of them. I'm going to put them together. And those are Terrence Sarion and Legend Glasgow. And I think both of these players, as incoming freshmen, are expected to kind of step in and compete for playing time right away. Now, are guys like Reggie Frischneck, Tei Nakua, are they going to be intent on letting a freshman who comes in and steal a spot from them? No, they are not going to be intent on allowing that. But I think this freshman class of wide receivers, and that's not even discounting the Pula twins, because I know Jaron and Kennan can both play wide receiver or DB. I think one will play one will play the other. But I think that all 3 of those, you include the Pulas, I guess, these incoming freshman wide receivers, they've got a lot of skills. And those of you who are everydayers know that I talked to Legend Glasgow this past fall at a Lehigh football game. And he said that BYU tried to get him to graduate early last year to enroll in time for last football season because they were so high on his skill set. He didn't do it ultimately. He played out his senior year at Lehigh, but now he's an early enrollee at BYU. He'll be going through spring ball this year. Who's to say that he, Terrence Sarion, one of the Pula twins, or both, they make a real move in spring ball because they're all enrolled right now? Who's to say that this freshman wide receiver class can't be that factor that aids guys like JoJo Phillips and Parker Kingston and making BYU's wide receiving core as strong as it can be, or maybe stronger than it was a season ago? Because last year was kind of a 3-man deal, and you missed a guy like JoJo Phillips for a large chunk of the season. So you need those wide receivers to step up in a big way. Other incoming freshmen that I expect to have a big role. I look at the situation that BYU has on the offensive line and wonder if some of these young offensive linemen that have already been in the program, I think of guys like Andrew Williams as an offensive tackle, could he really step up and fill that left tackle role? Or one of these transfers in, like Paki Finau, who I've been pretty high on. I can't discount Zach Yamauchi. Any of these guys that are coming to BYU, what are the chances that they end up starting for BYU? That's why you brought them in, ostensibly. You brought them in so that they could immediately make an impact. But I think some of these young linemen that TJ Woods has been coaching up, and like I said, Andrew Williams is one that's kind of stood out to me. I know that Ethan Thomason is a guy a lot of people have pointed to as the future at offensive tackle for BYU. Ethan's still dealing with some knee issues. So long as he's past said knee issues, there's a reason to think that he could make a move as well. But I look at that young offensive line group and think, hey, any one of those guys, and offensive line, I know for a lot of you out there, it's like yawn, but it's a group that is absolutely critical to BYU's hopes and dreams. So I think keep an eye on the young offensive lineman. And then number 4, Devon Eka. Now, he is another Lehigh High School addition, running back who I think has got a ton of potential in him. The biggest question for me is that Devon, who is already enrolled at BYU, can he be that stabilizing force in the running back core for BYU behind LJ Martin? The biggest concern behind LJ, and even with LJ himself, is health. Availability is a question mark for all of these guys, and that includes Sione Moa because of the injury concerns they've all had during their time in Provo. if a guy like Devon Eka comes in and proves to be a quick learner of this offense, and I think also maybe packs on some weight via offseason training, there's no reason to think that he couldn't be a guy that could earn playing time this fall. I really am high on his potential as a running back. I still wonder if he has the mass, and what I mean by that is the overall size to be a factor as a true freshman. I can't discount it, but it's just a question mark that lingers in my mind. And we'll see if either I'm right or I'm proven wrong, because I do think Devon Eka has got a ton of potential. And those of you asking, is this live or pre-recorded? It's live. So Caden, Thomas, we are live actually. So thank you for joining us. So I do think that there is a ton of young talent coming into this BYU football program. And I don't discount any of it having an impact, because I think we don't talk about enough that this recruiting class for BYU, this past recruiting class that includes Ryder Lyons and Brock Harris, guys are going on missions, but there's some guys who are already enrolling, like the Pula twins, etc. It's a top 25 class. It's one of the best classes in the country. And this is kind of the level we've wanted BYU to recruit at. And I think we need to let that talent really show what it's capable of. Yeah, some of it's going to be delayed because of going on missions, like I said, with the Lions. And also, I think Brock Harris, that they are guys that you're looking forward to seeing, but they're both in the mission field. I think, yeah, we already have Ryder out. I think Brock's going if he hasn't left already. So I do think that you've got a ton of young talent in this BYU football program that should not be overlooked in any way, shape, or form. So I know you asked for 5 guys, but I think I listed like 9 or 10 in there. So yeah, I just trust that what Kalani and his staff have done in terms of upgrading the talent base for BYU, I think it can't be overlooked at what they've done, because they've really been a group, speaking of the coaching staff at BYU, that has put a concerted effort in overall talent base for BYU, being the floor being raised. And that goes to the transfer portal. It goes to high school recruiting. And this is a program for BYU that will always be a developmental program first and foremost, where they bring in the vast majority of their guys from the high school ranks, develop them over time, and then unleash them. But I do think that the transfer portal is going to be a big help to kind of fill in cracks where it needs to be. And I think we've already seen that with this transfer portal class for BYU, is that they filled some holes that they needed. But I also can't overlook what they've recruited in the past 2 to 3 years since joining the Big 12 conference, because they got some dudes, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they've got in store for us coming up this fall. All right, we are going to finish up this show. That was actually one of like many questions that came in, but real quick, a couple of you already mentioning it. Psycho CD, I'm planning on showing up at Chubby's tomorrow for the live show. Scott Dunn also is going to be at Chubby's. So we are going to be doing a live show. Drake Toll from Locked On Big 12 is coming into town. I will be there at Chubby's by the University Mall in Orem, and then also the guys from Loyal Cougars, Jake Edmonds, Tosh McIntosh, who become really good friends of mine. They do a really, really fine job themselves. I love being on their show when I have the opportunity to do that. We're doing a live show. All 4 of us going to be broadcasting live. It's going to be live on both the Locked On Big 12 as well as this channel. And then obviously it'll be available after the fact. But if you want to come by after the BYU Utah game, we're planning on going live at 7:00 and talking all things BYU basketball in the aftermath of the rivalry game. Probably also talk a little bit about some football, probably look ahead to Arizona. And we'll also have your questions. So if you want to come by, please do. We're going to have a ton of fun with Drake, Jake, and Tosh. Almost rhymes, but Jake, Tosh. That's the 4 of us that'll be there. Chubby's in Orem. And by the way, you mentioned you're there for the live broadcast. Get yourself a free drink. So check it out. We'll have some fun with that tomorrow. But more questions coming up next as you roll on this edition of Locked On Cougars. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you've not signed up for the Locked On Cougars Every Dayer Club, would encourage you guys to do just that. Get the inside scoop on all things BYU. As a member of our all access tier, you get access to our members only Discord server. You get the Locked On merch store, by the way. If you want to get Locked On swag, hats, shirts, sweatshirts, all kinds of stuff. Get you 15% discount there. Go to lockedoncougars.supercast.com, or you can check the link in the show notes below and join us there. It's been a really, really fun addition to this podcast, and hope you guys will consider joining us at Locked On Cougars Everydayer Club, lockedoncougars.supercast.com. All right, so more questions here. Good question coming in here from Tavita. Could the BYU-Utah series be played in Allegiant Stadium similar to how the Florida and Georgia play in Jacksonville Stadium? Now, DJ, the biggest impediment to that happening is neither one of these programs are all that intent on giving up a home game and the home money. So if Allegiant Stadium, in theory, wanted to have BYU and Utah play their rivalry game in Las Vegas every single year, be a neutral site, obviously, you'd have 60,000+ fans packing in to Allegiant Stadium where the Raiders play in Las Vegas. You'd have to have the Raiders and whoever else is sponsoring it essentially pay what each one of these programs would get for a home game and probably a little premium on top of that. So if you know people who want to pay that much money, and we're talking that's a couple of million probably, that could be a conversation, but I wouldn't mind it, but I also don't think these two programs are keen on giving that up. Daniel Rigby, will BYU be scheduling Utah State in football anytime soon? I think the easy answer is no. But I also can't say that given time that it couldn't change. But he also says, why hasn't BYU scheduled any in-state games in the non-con and basketball in the last 3 years? It's a great question. I know that Utah State fans, I'm sure that will watch this, have been miffed about that. I know that Weber State, UVU, heck, Southern Utah, and Utah Tech would probably be interested in that. I would like to see more of it because I do think that if you're going to play some of these programs that are overmatched teams, I think of like Eastern Washington, etc., why don't you play a Weber State? Just make it an in-state game. But that makes too much sense, it feels like, for college basketball coaches. I just don't know why they don't do it. But, yeah, it'd be nice to see more of that. Brian, our good friend 49er Coug, coaching news got quiet, but there's still at least one open position, at least not publicly known to be filled. Do you see that gaining anytime soon? Speaking of being filled, I'm sure. I do think, yeah, they do have two positions on defense still to fill. I think you have two assistants that are needing to be filled. And right now, they still have guys like Justin Enna and Chad Kauha'a out on the road recruiting during this open window in those two spots. In theory, those are supposed to be the defensive ends coach as well as the safeties coach, but you can mix and match and kind of move guys into different positions there. But there are two, at least to my knowledge, two open assistant coaching roles, and we'll see what Kalani Sitake and Kelly Papinga ultimately opt to do. But I do think that they should be announcing those soonish, but I don't have a timeline for that. Thomas Carlson, who do you see being BYU's biggest role player coming off the bench for the rest of Big 12 play in basketball? It's a great question there. I would like it to be a guy like Tyler Morus, because remember, when Tyler signed with BYU, he was this three-point marksman who had been a big-time shooter at the D2 level, playing for Alaska Fairbanks, then playing at Idaho. And the hope was he was going to come in and really kind of let things reign for BYU. There's still time for him to turn that around, but if he doesn't do that, I think the guy I turn to is Hadim Boop. Now, we just talked, it's 4:00 Mountain Time right now as I do this show. An hour ago, we talked to Kevin Young, and his exact quote on Hadim Boop was, the injury he suffered at Texas Tech was not as serious as it looked. So that made me think that there's a decent likelihood we see Boop available tomorrow against Utah. That'd be awesome. I think that would be a major boon to BYU's roster, because I think what we saw Boop's role in that Texas Tech game, kind of playing a more of a 3-4 combo role where he's a swingman versus being a 5 in BYU system, I think it fits his skill set a whole lot more. So, yeah, I'd like to see Tyler Morus break out, maybe a Dominic Diomande, but I do think I'm putting my money right now on Hadim Boop. I think that's probably the best question there. Let's see. Oh, Big Uncle Pooh, our good friend Adrian, I got you. When is America's favorite BYU podcast host showing up again to a tailgate? Now, Adrian, you know I love you dearly. I have a lot of responsibilities on game day, but my wife, funny enough, who puts up with a lot of my crazy schedule in radio and podcasting and all that, she's actually encouraged me to go to these tailgates more often than I have actually shown up. So let me just put on the record right now that I will be at a tailgate at some point this coming season. I will make it happen. I will come partake if guys like Sang Kim are there, our good friend with his tri-tip, you with your brisket. I would love nothing more than to indulge with you guys, and we'll obviously have some fun. So I'll be there. Let's see, man. I got to get through more of these questions more quickly. I've heard rumors about Kennard Davis Jr. not being satisfied with his role. This comes from Nathan Vaughn. Overall, what are the reports on the overall team camaraderie and chemistry, especially with these new additions like Abdullah Ahmed? By all accounts, I think that the camaraderie on this team is actually pretty strong. If you've been paying attention on social media, they've been doing some of these videos where I think it was AJ DeBonsa was asking guys who had the worst taste in music, and they were clowning on one another, but it was actually, you could tell the guys were having some fun with it at the same time. So I don't think that the camaraderie is an issue. And yes, I know that Moo Davis hasn't been playing at the highest level he could be playing at, but I think that the camaraderie is not a problem with this team. I think that just the way they interact with one another, usually you can kind of tell with teams that are kind of on the outs with one another. I just don't see that with this squad. Could I be dead wrong and inside the locker room that it's gone sour? Sure, but they're not showing that to at least us public facing wise, at least to my knowledge. Maybe you know more than me, Nathan, but to my knowledge, I don't think it's been an issue right now. Landon Bybee, as the football team sits right now, do we feel we are better than 2025's team? Although we've retained great talent and picked up a couple of good players to backfill 2025 key players, on paper, it doesn't feel like we're better. Why wouldn't they be better, Landon? That's my response to you. Think about the talent BYU retained. They brought back guys, the likes of Michigan, because Jay Hill tried to pick off guys. I can assure you, knowing people that I know, that Michigan tried to pick off guys from BYU's roster. I think it's very easy to point to Falatau Satuala, et cetera. They would have liked to have taken guys away from BYU. And the thought process for me as to why I think BYU is better is because the talent that was already there, that powered BYU to a 12-2 season last year. Yes, I know that Texas Tech was right there, kind of that the juggernaut that you couldn't overcome. But I think with an extra season of development, an extra season of working on skills, guys working on their bodies. Like I said, I talked earlier about the young talent in this program that's both already there and incoming. I think BYU's best days are still ahead of them. I really do believe that. I do think that they've got a ton of potential on this roster, and keeping the guys together, that continuity, it doesn't exist in college football. I don't know if you guys saw it. Just to step aside for a minute, did you see what Dabo Swinney said about a linebacker that flipped, that signed with Clemson, started classes, and then Pete Golding, the Ole Miss head coach, according to what Dabo Swinney is saying, he texted this linebacker in class and said, "Hey, I know you signed with Clemson. What's the buyout?" Like, that was a quote that Dabo Swinney used. That kind of shows you how cutthroat this era of college football has become. We've got coaches, and I know that tampering, it's just kind of it's a weird thing, but if you have a guy who is signed with Clemson, who's getting texted by the Ole Miss head coach, says, "What's your buyout?" And then that kid, by the way, 4 hours later, apparently, against the express wishes of this kid's agent, hits the portal once again and is now joining the Ole Miss Rebels. That's stuff that tears a roster apart and really, I think, affects what these rosters look like and how they perform. And the reason I bring that up is because you're not seeing that with BYU, at least to my knowledge. And that shows the culture of BYU is pretty dang strong. They've got a lot of guys who are really, really bought into this football program. And that continuity, it can't be discounted. I know that BYU's added some talent. They had to. You lose guys like Chase Roberts and Jack Kelly, most notably. I think Isaiah Jota and Waylon Lapuaho are pretty notable guys that you lose as well. But when you retain Bear Bachmeier, LJ Martin, Parker Kingston, JoJo Phillips, man, Bruce Mitchell, Keanu Tanavasa, I can go through this entire list. Isaiah Glasker, Siale Acera, Trey Alexander, Evan Johnson, Falatau Satuala, Radar Damuni, and then add guys like Akedu Luave, Zach Yamauchi. The way this roster is constructed for BYU, I am very excited for it. And I really do think it could be one of those payoff years this year. I do think that you look at it, and the nice part is you've got a ton of potential with this roster, and we just need to let it kind of do its thing. I really do think it's a good spot. Fishy Coog, a couple more questions here before we wrap up. What is the status of the kicking game going into the 2026 season? Fishy Coog, I don't have really a good answer for you there, because obviously Will Ferrin is off to the NFL, and we wish him the absolute best of luck as he heads to the Senior Bowl down there in Mobile, Alabama. But I think the question mark is, okay, who Who replaces him at kicker? Is it going to be somebody already on the roster? We'll see. Also at punter, I don't know how widely this has been reported, but it needs to be talked about more. Is it Sam Vanderhaar? He wants to come back and kick, be BYU's punter this coming season. He needs a waiver from the NCAA to do that. Will he get that waiver? TBD. We're still in a waiting pattern there. I know that they have Fuller Schertz, who was a freshman on this year's squad at punter, as his backup. So in theory, you just kind of elevate Fuller. But I thought that Sam was absolutely awesome. And if he's able to get come back to BYU, why wouldn't you want him around the program? Because I think he's one of those guys who really likes to be at BYU. And if you can get that waiver, you want to bring him back, but it's a waiting game, it feels like, for that. Let's see, a couple more questions. A Wild Turkey Fart Blunt, our good friend Ryan. I think that BYU needs to bring in another quarterback. Are there any names you're aware of that BYU is interested in? I know that BYU is interested in a quarterback, as you say, Ryan, but I don't really have good names out there, at least to my knowledge. If you do, feel free to, DM or email me. But I do think BYU does need to backfill that quarterback spot with maybe one more roster addition there. And I trust A-Rod, speaking of Aaron Roderick, he'll find the right guy. He's a very, very good evaluator of talent at the quarterback spot. And I know that you're not necessarily bringing in a guy who's really going to challenge for playing time probably right away, because you already have Trayson Bourget. You've already got Enoch Watson behind Bear Bachmeier, but you need to have another body there. And I think he'll find somebody in the portal. And I trust that he'll answer that question. And then Rhoda Mort, after LJ, who will be the dark horse in the backfield next season? I already kind of talked about Devon Eka on today's show, and I do think that he's probably that dark horse because he is a true freshman, and you're not really fully with guys enrolling in school as a true freshman, you're not 100% certain on what you're going to get from guys like that. But I still think the dark horse also could be a guy like a Jovessa Demuni. We have heard Aaron Roderick and others rave about his potential and the fact that he's kind of a different running back than an LJ or some of the running backs like Sione Moa that they have on this roster. Could he finally emerge into his own and be kind of that, I guess, call it speed back that can be a weapon for this BYU offense? That would be nice to see. So we'll see how it all shakes out. So there you go. That's what I got for you guys. Live edition. I kind of owed you guys an extra show with how crazy this week has been. But honestly, thank you for all the questions. I think I got to most of them, but not all of them. So thank you for all of your support. And by the way, on social media right now, they have officially announced that you can now have jersey patches. Remember, like what the NBA has, where they have different companies on their uniforms. Well, the college football world is going to have that coming up this August. I threw it out on our Locked On Cougars Twitter feed. I said, who is going to be BYU's jersey patch sponsor? And I did add the caveat, wrong answers only. So if you want to weigh in on that, we've got a lot of good contributions there. I'm having actually a lot of fun looking at this because there's some really good ones, some like legitimate, like this is what it should be. But a lot of you also having fun saying, hey, this is what it could be, and having fun with like, hey, the Billy Goater, Bud Light. Okay, we're not going to see that. So there's a lot of good ones out there. If you want to add to that conversation, please do. But as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your guys' first listen of the day. And once again, if you haven't signed up for the Locked On Cougars Everydayer Club, please do just that. But go make your second listen of the day. If you're still around on this Friday afternoon/evening, go check out Locked On College Football. I thought Spencer McLaughlin had an incredible show today, talking a lot of the hot topics across the sport that we all love. Or check out Locked On Big 12, because we do have our live show tomorrow night at Chubby's with Drake as well. But as always, once again, thank you for all your support. Be back with you guys tomorrow night live from Chubby's in Orem, and come be an everydayer right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.